On a blistering July afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Senator Maya Carter, a black woman in a modest navy blazer, rolled her suitcase toward the Delta check-in counter, expecting a smooth trip to Washington, D.C. Two staffers, Kyle and Tara, smirked, whispering as she handed over her first-class ticket. Their eyes flicked with doubt, then Tara sneered loudly. "First class? You sure about that?" What seemed like a petty jab hit a brutal storm of racial bias that would threaten her future. What would they do when her true power emerged? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. If you stand for justice and exposing prejudice, hit like and subscribe for more gripping tales of truth and triumph. The air inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport hung thick with the scent of jet fuel and sweat as Senator Maya Carter stepped up to the Delta Airlines check-in counter, her navy blazer slightly wrinkled from the Texas heat. She'd flown this route a dozen times before, always keeping a low profile. No flashy aides or designer suits, just a woman in jeans hauling a modest black suitcase. Today was no different, or so she thought, as she slid her first-class ticket across the way counter to the two staffers standing there, Kyle and Tara, their Delta badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. She needed to get to Washington, D.C. for a critical vote on healthcare funding, a fight she'd been prepping for weeks. And this was just the first step, a routine check-in before a quick flight. Kyle, a lanky guy with a buzz cut and a smirk, that seemed glued to his face, barely glanced at the ticket before tossing it back like it was trash, his hazel eyes narrowing as he leaned toward Tara, a wiry blonde with a ponytail so tight it pulled her skin taut. "Did you win this in a raffle or something?" He snorted, loud enough for the family in line behind Maya to turn their heads, a little girl clutching a teddy bear staring wide-eyed. Tara chuckled, her voice dripping with mockery as she tapped at the computer, not even pretending to work. "Yeah, first class. That's a stretch," she added, her green eyes flicking up to scan Maya from head to toe, lingering on her scuffed sneakers like they were evidence of some crime. Maya's chest tightened, a familiar ache she'd felt too many times growing up in Houston's rougher neighborhoods. But she kept her face steady, her brown eyes calm behind her simple glasses. She'd faced worse than this in the Senate, sparring with old men who thought she didn't belong, so she wasn't about to let two airport grunts rattle her. "Here's my ID," she said evenly, pulling her Texas driver's license from her wallet and sliding it over, her voice smooth as polished stone. Kyle snatched it up, holding it to the light like he was a detective in some cheap cop show, squinting at the photo, then at her, then back again. "Looks real enough, I guess," he muttered. But the way he said it made it clear he didn't believe she'd earned that ticket. Not someone like her. Not with her dark skin and no-name purse. Tara leaned over his shoulder, her lips curling, into a grin that showed too many teeth. "Let's make sure, huh? Can't be too careful these days," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard now. Though Maya could tell it was all for show, a delay tactic to keep her standing there, exposed, while travelers shuffled past, some stealing glances, others pretending not to notice. The line behind her grew, a businessman in a pinstripe suit tapping his foot, a woman with a stroller sighing loudly, and Maya felt the weight of their impatience pressing into her back. She shifted her weight, her suitcase still unprocessed, beside her, and asked, "Is there an issue with my reservation?" Her tone stayed polite, professional, the way she'd trained herself to speak when the world tried to push her down. Kyle shrugged, his smirk widening as he handed back her license with a flick of his wrist. "No issue, just doing our job," he lied, his voice flat, but his eyes alive with something nasty, something that said he enjoyed this little power trip. Tara nodded, her ponytail bobbing like she was agreeing with some unspoken joke, and then, as if on cue, she reached for Maya's suitcase, her fingers brushing the handle before she slipped, letting it tip over with a loud thud that echoed across the terminal. The zipper popped open, spilling Maya's belongings onto the grimy floor. A notebook, a pair of socks, a folded sweater tumbling out in a messy heap. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the little girl with the teddy bear pointing as her mom whispered something sharp, and Maya's breath caught in her throat, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Oops," Tara said, her voice high and fake, her hand flying to her mouth like she was shocked. but her eyes danced with glee as she watched Maya kneel to gather her things. Kyle crossed his arms, leaning back against the counter, his laugh low and cruel. "Guess she can't afford better luggage," he said, loud enough for the businessman to smirk and the stroller mom to look away, embarrassed for her. Maya's knees pressed into the cold tile as she scooped up her notebook, her fingers brushing a photo of her late grandmother that had slipped out, the woman who'd raised her to stand tall no matter what. Her heart pounded, anger bubbling, up like lava, but she swallowed it down, shoving everything back into the bag with quick, precise movements. She stood, brushing dust off her jeans, and faced them again, her voice steady despite the fire in her gut. "Can you process my bag now?" she asked, locking eyes with Tara, who just shrugged, her grin fading slightly as if she'd expected more of a fight. Kyle grabbed the suitcase this time, slapping a tag on it with a lazy flick, his smirk still plastered on like he'd won something. "Sure thing, princess," he said, the word dripping with venom, and he pointed toward the drop-off area with a vague wave, making it clear he wouldn't lift a finger to help. Tara giggled again, turning back to the screen, her fingers tapping, idly as Maya hauled the bag away herself, the weight of it nothing compared to the humiliation sinking into her bones. She walked off, her steps measured, her mind racing with the vote she needed to reach, the lives depending on her getting to DC on time. But a prickling sensation crawled up her spine, a warning she couldn't shake. This wasn't just rudeness, not just a bad day for two bored employees. It was something uglier, something rooted in the way they'd looked at her, judged her, decided she didn't belong. She'd dealt with prejudice before, in boardrooms and backrooms, but this felt sharper, more public, a spectacle designed to cut deep. As she dropped her bag at the oversized luggage area, checking the tag twice to make sure they hadn't sabotaged that too, she caught a glimpse of Kyle and Tara watching her from the counter, their heads bent together, whispering, plotting. Her stomach twisted, a knot of dread tightening as she realized this was only the beginning, a first sting that would fester into something far worse. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her short coiled hair and headed toward security, telling herself she could handle this. She'd handled worse, but the truth gnawed at her. They weren't done with her yet, and whatever came next would hit harder, dig deeper, test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The terminal buzzed around her, travelers rushing past, oblivious to the battle brewing, and Maya steeled herself, her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. "Hold your ground, baby girl." Because she knew deep down, this was about more than a ticket. It was about who they thought she was and who she'd prove herself to be. Maya Carter pushed through the bustling crowd at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor as she dragged her carry-on toward the TSA pre-check line, the sting of Kyle and Tara's mockery still burning in her chest. The terminal hummed with life, a tangle of voices and rolling suitcases, the air thick with summer humidity seeping in from outside. She'd shaken off the suitcase spill at check-in, or so she told herself, brushing her coiled hair back and adjusting her navy blazer, determined to keep her focus on the healthcare vote waiting in Washington, D.C. This was just a hiccup, right? She'd faced bigger battles in the Senate, stared down sneering colleagues who doubted her every move, so why let two petty Delta staffers get under her skin? But as she approached the security checkpoint, her pre-check pass clutched in one hand. That prickling dread crept back, a whisper in her gut telling her the worst was yet to come. She flashed her pass at the TSA officer, a burly man with a graying beard and a name tag reading Hank, expecting the usual nod and wave through she'd earned with years of frequent travel. Instead, Hank's bushy brows furrowed, his meaty hand pausing midair as he squinted at her, then at something behind her. What was he looking at? Maya turned slightly, her heart sinking as she spotted Kyle and Tara, now off duty, their Delta vests swapped for casual tees, weaving through the crowd like sharks circling prey. Were they following her? Their heads bent close, Kyle's buzz cut gleaming under the lights, Tara's tight ponytail swinging as they whispered to each other, their eyes locked on her with a glint of malice. Hank cleared his throat, his voice gruff as he stepped closer. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to step aside for a secondary check," he said, his tone flat but his stance rigid, like he'd already made up his mind about her. Maya's stomach twisted, her fingers tightening around her pass. "I've got pre-check clearance," she said, keeping her voice steady, professional, the way she'd learned to navigate a world that too often saw her as less. This should be routine. But Hank wasn't listening, his gaze flicking past her again, and she caught the faintest nod from Kyle, a signal so quick she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. What kind of game were they playing now? Before she could protest, Hank gestured to a cordoned-off area, his beefy arm ushering her out of line as travelers streamed by, some staring, others averting their eyes like she was a problem they didn't want to touch. "Just procedure," he muttered. But the way he avoided her gaze told her this was no accident. Comment number 1 down below if you've ever been unfairly singled out like Maya. Because who hasn't felt that sting of judgment when they least expected it? Hit that like button if you're rooting for her to fight back, and subscribe to see how she turns this mess around. Maya hauled her carry-on to the side, her jaw tight as Hank began rifling through her briefcase, his thick fingers flipping through her Senate briefing notes like they were junk mail, tossing her laptop onto a metal table with a clatter that made her wince. The crowd thickened around her, a businessman in a crisp suit glancing over with a frown, a teenage girl snapping a photo with her phone, the flash catching Maya off guard. Was this about to go viral? She stood tall, her 5'6" frame unyielding, but inside her pulse raced, anger and humiliation warring for control. She'd earned that pre-check status through countless flights, a perk of her Senate duties. Yet here she was, treated like a suspect. Why did it always come down to this? Hank pulled out her wallet, her pens, even a granola bar she'd packed for the flight, piling them up like evidence, his grunts filling the silence as he worked. Then Tara's voice cut through the noise, sharp and smug, drifting from where she and Kyle lingered near a coffee kiosk. "Told you she'd get flagged," she said, loud enough for Maya to hear, her green eyes glinting with triumph. Kyle chuckled, his arms crossed over his chest. "Yeah, some people just don't fit the profile," he added, his words a knife twisting in Maya's gut. Profile? What did that even mean? She locked eyes with them for a split second, their smirks daring her to react, but she turned back to Hank, refusing to give them the satisfaction. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice firm, her brown eyes boring into him. "Check my clearance again." Hank hesitated, his meaty paw hovering over her laptop. But then he reached into her briefcase one last time, his fingers emerging with a small metallic object, a pocket knife she'd never seen before. "What's this?" he barked, holding it up like a trophy, his tone accusing now, his beard bristling as he stepped back. Maya's breath caught, her mind racing. That wasn't hers. No way. She'd never carry anything like that, not with her job, not with airport rules burned into her brain. "That's not mine," she said, her voice rising slightly, her hands lifting in a calm gesture. "Someone planted it." But Hank's eyes narrowed, his skepticism plain as day, and the crowd around her buzzed louder, whispers turning into murmurs, the teenage girl's phone now recording, her friends giggling behind her. Planted? By who? Maya's gaze snapped. To Kyle and Tara, still watching from the kiosk, Tara's smirk widening as she sipped her coffee. Kyle nodding like he'd just won a bet. Had they slipped it in when her suitcase spilled? The thought hit her like a punch, her anger flaring hot and bright. But she forced it down, her years of Senate debates kicking in, teaching her to think fast, stay sharp. "Scan my bag again," she said, her tone commanding now, her finger pointing at the X-ray machine. "You'll see it wasn't there before." Hank grunted, clearly annoyed, but he shoved the briefcase back through the scanner, the screen flickering as it processed. The seconds stretched, Maya's heart pounding in her ears, the crowd's eyes boring into her back, until Hank's face twitched, a flicker of doubt crossing his grizzled features. "Nothing on the scan," he admitted, his voice low, reluctant, as he held up the knife again, turning it over in his hand. Must have missed it the first time. Missed it? Or someone added it after? Maya's mind screamed the truth. Kyle and Tara's little stunt had backfired, but the damage was done. Her dignity shredded in front of strangers, her trip to DC now a public spectacle. "So I'm clear?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension, her stare daring him to argue. Hank nodded, shoving her stuff back into the briefcase with a grunt, his cheeks reddening slightly. "Yeah, you're good," he said, stepping aside. But the victory felt hollow, her hands trembling as she repacked her things, the teenage girl still filming, the businessman shaking his head like she'd caused the delay. Comment number 1. If you think Kyle and Tara deserve to face the heat for this, because who else is sick of seeing innocent people targeted? Smash that like if you're with Maya all the way, and subscribe to catch every twist as she battles back. As Maya slung her briefcase over her shoulder, heading toward the gate, she caught Tara's smirk falter for a split second, Kyle's arms uncrossing as they exchanged a quick glance. They'd lost this round, hadn't they? But the way they lingered watching her go told her this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. What would they pull next to make her pay for slipping through their trap? Maya Carter strode away from the TSA checkpoint at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her sneakers pounding the tile with purpose, her navy blazer swaying as she pulled her carry-on behind her. The sting of the security ordeal lingered, her fingers still trembling from repacking her briefcase after that planted knife fiasco. But she'd outsmarted them, hadn't she? Hank's gruff admission that her bag was clean echoed in her mind, a small win against Kyle and Tara's vicious little game. She adjusted her glasses, her brown eyes scanning the terminal ahead, the gate numbers flashing on screens above, her focus shifting back to the healthcare vote in Washington, D.C., the one she couldn't miss, not with her constituents counting on her. The crowd thinned as she neared gate B-17, the air buzzing with the chatter of travelers, the faint whiff of pretzels drifting from a nearby stand. She'd shaken off their trap, proven her innocence, and now she could board, get to work, leave this mess behind, or so she thought. As she rounded a corner, the gate came into view, a cluster of passengers milling around, some slumped in plastic chairs, others tapping at phones, the usual pre-flight chaos. She spotted her flight, Delta 1423 to Reagan National, listed as on time in bold letters, and a flicker of relief warmed her chest. She'd made it through security, her dignity battered but intact, and that was enough for now, right? But then she saw them, Kyle and Tara standing behind the gate podium, their Delta badges back on, their smirks replaced with cold, calculating stares. Her stomach dropped, a lead weight settling in her gut. How were they here? They'd been off duty at security, trailing her like vultures, but now they were working the gate, their hands on the boarding process. Her boarding process. She slowed her pace, her carry-on wheels clicking against the floor, her mind racing. This wasn't coincidence. This was a hunt, and she was the prey. She approached the podium, her boarding pass ready, her face a mask of calm despite the storm brewing inside. The line for first-class boarding was short, just a handful of suits and a retired couple with matching sun hats, and she took her place behind them, her pulse thudding in her ears. Kyle glanced up from the computer, his hazel eyes locking onto her, a flicker of something dark passing through them. While Tara leaned against the counter, her ponytail swinging as she scanned the crowd, her green gaze landing on Maya with a predator's precision. "First-class passengers, please step forward," Kyle called, his voice monotone, professional, but the way he stared at her said this was personal. The suits boarded first, their passes beeped through with quick efficiency, the couple shuffling after, their sun hats bobbing as they disappeared down the jet bridge. Then it was Maya's turn. She handed her pass to Kyle, her fingers steady, her voice firm. "Seat 3B, she said, meeting his gaze, daring him to try something. He took the pass, his smirk creeping back as he scanned it, the machine beeping, once, then twice, then falling silent. He frowned, tapping the screen with exaggerated confusion, his head tilting as if he'd stumbled on a puzzle. Looks like there's an issue here," he said, loud enough for the passengers behind her to perk up. A woman in a red dress craning her neck to see. Maya's jaw tightened, her patience fraying like a worn thread. "What issue?" she asked, her tone sharp now, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Kyle shrugged, handing the pass back with a lazy flick. "System says it's invalid. You'll have to wait while we sort this out," he said, his voice dripping with fake regret, his smirk widening as he waved the next passenger forward. Tara stepped in, her arms crossed, her voice cutting through the hum of the gate. "Maybe coach is more your speed," she said, her words a slap, her green eyes glinting with glee as she watched Maya's reaction. The woman in the red dress gasped softly, a man with a briefcase muttering something under his breath, and Maya felt the weight of their stares, a spotlight she hadn't asked for. Her anger flared, hot and bright, her hands clenching around her carry-on handle. "Scan it again," she said, her voice low, controlled, but carrying the weight of years spent fighting for her place. Kyle rolled his eyes, taking the pass back with a theatrical sigh, scanning it once more, the machine beeping a third time before he paused, his brow furrowing like he'd been caught off guard. "Still no good," he lied, his tone smug, his fingers tapping the counter as if he could drag this out forever. The line behind her grew restless, the man with the briefcase clearing his throat, the woman in red shifting her weight, and Maya knew they were winning, turning her into the problem, the delay, the outsider. She took a breath, her mind racing, her Senate-honed instincts kicking in. "Call your supervisor," she said, her voice rising now, cutting through the gate's noise, her stare pinning Kyle like a bug on a board. He hesitated, his smirk faltering for a split second, but Tara jumped in, her ponytail bouncing as she leaned forward. "No need for that. We've got it under control," she said, her tone patronizing, her hand waving dismissively. But the man with the briefcase had had enough, stepping up beside Maya, his voice booming over the crowd. "This is ridiculous. She's got a valid ticket. I saw it scan the first time. Let her board already." His words hit like a hammer, the crowd murmuring in agreement, the woman in red nodding vigorously, and Kyle's face twitched, his hazel eyes darting to Tara. She scowled, her green gaze flickering with annoyance, but the pressure was on, the passengers turning against them. Kyle scanned the pass one last time, the machine beeping green, and he shoved it back at Maya with a grunt. "Fine. Go," he muttered, his smirk gone, his voice tight with defeat. Maya took the pass, her head high, her steps steady as she moved. Toward the jet bridge, the man with the briefcase giving her a quick nod of respect. She'd won, hadn't she? She'd faced them down, turned the crowd in her favor, and now she could board, get to DC, do her job. Her heart lifted, a fleeting rush of triumph warming her as she stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool air brushing her face, the plane just ahead. She'd outmaneuvered their petty sabotage, proven she belonged, and that was that. But as she glanced back, she saw Kyle and Tara huddled at the podium, their heads bent close, their whispers sharp and urgent, their eyes following her with a venom that made her skin crawl. Her triumph soured, a cold knot tightening in her gut. They weren't done, were they? Kyle's muttered, "This isn't over," from earlier rang in her ears, a promise she couldn't ignore, and Tara's glare burned into her back like a brand. She reached the plane's door, her carry-on clicking behind her, her relief unraveling into dread. What had they just set in motion? She settled into seat 3B, her briefcase stowed, her mind spinning as the cabin filled with passengers. There, chatter a distant hum. She'd thought she'd escaped their trap, turned their game against them, but the way they'd watched her go told a different story, one of revenge, of escalation, of something bigger waiting to strike. Her hands gripped the armrests, her brown eyes staring out the window at the tarmac. The planes lined up like soldiers, and she knew deep down this victory was a mirage, a fragile shield about to shatter under a blow she couldn't yet see. The gate agents' voices crackled over the loudspeaker, Kyle's monotone cutting through her thoughts. "Special screening for certain passengers," he announced, his words slow, deliberate, his gaze finding her through the cabin window, Tara's smirk flashing beside him. The crowd at the gate stirred, heads turning, and Maya's breath caught, her false wind crumbling into dust. What were they planning to hit her with next? Maya Carter stood in the short first-class line at gate B-17, her carry-on clicking against the tile of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her navy blazer brushing her hips as she gripped her boarding pass, the ink still warm from the printer. The terminal buzzed around her, a chaotic symphony of rolling bags and muffled announcements, the air tinged with the faint tang of jet fuel wafting through the open jet bridge door. She'd just forced Kyle and Tara to back down, Their smug plan to stall her at the gate crumbling under the weight of a passenger's outrage, and now she was steps away from boarding Delta Flight 1423 to Washington, D.C., her mind already racing toward the healthcare vote she couldn't miss. The line moved fast, a pair of executives in tailored suits scanning their passes with crisp beeps, a retired couple in sun hats shuffling behind them, their laughter light as they disappeared into the tunnel. Maya stepped up, her brown eyes steady. Behind her glasses, her 5'6" frame radiating a quiet strength as she handed her pass to Kyle, his buzz cut catching the overhead lights, his hazel eyes narrowing with a glint of spite. "Seat 3B, she said, her voice firm, her stare locking onto his, daring him to pull another stunt. He took the pass, his fingers brushing hers with a deliberate slowness, his smirk creeping back as he slid it under the scanner, the machine, humming for a moment before letting out a sharp, stuttering beep. He frowned, tapping the screen with a theatrical flair, his head tilting as if puzzled. "Systems flagging this as invalid," he said, his voice loud, carrying over the gates. Drawing the eyes of the woman in the red dress behind her, her lips parting in a soft gasp. Maya's chest tightened, her anger flaring like a struck match, but she kept her face smooth, her years in the Senate teaching her to mask the fire inside. "It scanned green 2 minutes ago," she said, her tone cutting through his act, her hand resting on her carry-on like an anchor. Kyle shrugged, his smirk widening as he handed the pass back with a flick of his wrist. "Not now, it doesn't. Step aside, we'll figure it out," he said, waving the next passenger forward. The woman in red hesitating as she glanced at Maya, her brows knitting with unease. Tara leaned in from the podium's edge, her tight ponytail swinging, her green eyes glinting with malice. "Maybe coach is more your speed," she said, her voice a venomous purr, her words landing like a slap, loud enough for the man with the briefcase to turn, his frown deepening as he clutched his own pass. Maya felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the crowd's stares prickling her skin, a spotlight she hadn't signed up for, but she refused to flinch, her jaw tightening as she faced them down. "Scan it again," she said, her voice rising now, steady but edged with steel, her brown eyes boring into Kyle's. He rolled his eyes, snatching the pass back with a huff, his fingers jabbing at the scanner as if it had personally offended him, the machine beeping once, then twice, then falling silent again. "Nope, still no good," he lied, his tone smug, his hazel eyes flicking to Tara with a shared glee. Their little game stretching out as the line behind Maya grew restless, the woman in red shifting her weight, the man with the briefcase tapping, his foot with a sharp rhythm. "This is absurd," Maya said, her voice cutting through the gate's noise, her hands clenching around her carry-on handle. "You've got no reason to hold me up. Check your system or get someone who can." Tara crossed her arms, her smirk twisting into something nastier. "We're just following protocol," she said, her tone dripping with fake innocence, her green gaze daring Maya to push back. The crowd murmured, a low hum of confusion and impatience, the retired couple peeking back from the jet bridge, their sun hats tilting as they whispered to each other. Maya's pulse pounded in her ears, her anger bubbling over, but she kept her stance firm, her mind racing for a way to break their hold. She'd faced worse in Senate hearings, hadn't she? Old men with cigars questioning her every word. Yet, here she was, stalled by 2 gate agents with a grudge. "Call your supervisor," she said, her voice booming now, her stare pinning Kyle like a dart on a board. He hesitated, his smirk faltering, his fingers hovering over the scanner, but Tara jumped in, her ponytail bouncing as she waved a hand. "No need. We've got this," she said, her tone patronizing, her eyes flicking to the crowd as if inviting them to judge. The man with the briefcase stepped forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is nonsense. I saw her pass scan earlier. You're wasting everyone's time. Let her board." His words hit hard, the woman in red nodding vigorously, her red heels clicking as she shifted closer. The crowd's murmurs turning into a swell of agreement, a chorus of grumbles and headshakes. Kyle's face twitched, his hazel eyes darting. To Tara, her green gaze narrowing with annoyance, their control slipping under the weight of the passenger's frustration. He scanned the pass one last time, the machine beeping green with a reluctant chirp, and he shoved it back at Maya with a grunt. "Fine. "Go," he muttered, his smirk gone, his voice tight with defeat, his hands dropping to his sides like a kid caught stealing. Tara scowled, her arms uncrossing, her glare burning into Maya's back as she stepped forward, her carry-on rolling behind her, her head high despite the sweat beading on her neck. The man with the briefcase gave her a quick nod, a flicker of respect in his eyes, and the woman in red smiled faintly, her unease melting into something softer. Maya moved down the jet bridge, the cool air brushing her face, the plane's door just ahead, her heart lifting with a rush of triumph. She'd won again, hadn't she? Forced them to back off, turned the crowd into her shield, and now she could board, get to DC, do what she was elected to do. Her steps quickened, her sneakers silent on the carpeted tunnel, her mind already shifting to the vote, the lives depending on her presence. She'd outsmarted their sabotage, proven she belonged in that first-class seat, and that was enough, right? But as she reached the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeting her with a practiced smile, she couldn't shake the chill creeping up her spine, the echo of Kyle's earlier threat. "This isn't over," ringing in her ears like a bell, tolling doom. She glanced back one last time, catching a glimpse of them at the podium through the gate's glass, their heads bent close, their whispers sharp and urgent, their eyes following her with a venom that made her skin crawl. Her triumph faltered, a cold knot tightening in her gut, her hands gripping her carry-on tighter as she stepped aboard. The cabin stretched out before her, plush seats and soft lighting, a haven she'd fought to reach. But the victory felt fragile, a thin veneer over a storm she couldn't yet see. She settled into seat 3B, her briefcase stowed overhead, her breath steadying as passengers filed in, their chatter a distant hum. She'd thought she'd escaped their grasp, turned their game against them, but the way they'd watched her go, the way Tara's glare had lingered, told her this was far from finished. What were they plotting now, and how much worse would it get? The jet bridge retracted with a thud, the plane's engines humming to life, and Maya stared out the window at the tarmac, the sun dipping low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. She'd won this round, but the fight was just beginning, and whatever came next would hit harder, cut deeper, test her in ways she couldn't yet fathom. Maya Carter sank into the plush leather of seat 3B aboard Delta Flight 1423, her navy blazer settling around her as she stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin, the faint hum of the plane's engines vibrating through the cabin floor. The first class section stretched out before her, a quiet oasis of wide seats and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd just endured at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. She'd fought her way past Kyle and Tara's gate sabotage, their smirks fading under the crowd's pressure. And now she was here, safe, ready to prep for the healthcare vote in Washington, D.C. Her brown eyes flicked to the window, the tarmac, shimmering in the late July heat, and she let out a slow breath, her hands smoothing her jeans as she tried to shake off the lingering sting of their hostility. She'd won, hadn't she? Forced them to let her board, proven she belonged. So, why did her gut still twist with unease? The cabin filled slowly, passengers shuffling in with their bags, a businessman in a gray suit claiming 2A, a woman with a silk scarf settling into 4C, their chatter a low buzz as the flight attendants moved through the aisle, their smiles practiced and warm. Maya pulled her briefcase onto her lap, flipping it open to review her notes, the pages crisp under her fingers, her mind shifting to the vote that could save lives back in Texas. But then, the jet bridge door creaked open one last time. And her heart stuttered as Kyle and Tara stepped aboard, their Delta badges gone, their casual T's marking them as non-revenue passengers now, hitching a ride on her flight. What were they doing here? Her breath caught, her fingers freezing on her notes as they strode down the aisle, their eyes locking onto her with a predator's focus. Kyle's buzz cut glinting under the cabin lights, Tara's tight ponytail swinging with every step. They stopped near the galley just a few rows ahead, their heads bent close as they whispered to Lisa, the flight attendant with a short bob and a name tag pinned to her navy vest. Maya's pulse quickened, her ears straining to catch their words over the hum of the plane, but she didn't need to hear them to know they were up to something. Why else would they follow her on board? Lisa's face tightened, her lips pursing. As she glanced at Maya, then back at them, her hands fidgeting with a stack of napkins. Kyle leaned in, his voice low but sharp, his hazel eyes flicking to Maya with a glint of spite. "That woman in 3B, her seat's stolen," he said, loud, enough for the businessman in 2A to turn his head, his brow furrowing. Tara nodded, her green eyes glinting with malice. "Yeah, we flagged it at the gate. She shouldn't be here," she added, her tone dripping with fake concern, her ponytail bouncing as she gestured toward Maya. "Comment number 1 below if you think it's outrageous they're still targeting Maya, because who else is fed up with this nonstop harassment? Hit that like button if you're cheering for her to shut them down, and subscribe to see how she fights back against this." "Onboard ambush!" Maya's chest tightened, her anger flaring hot and bright, her hands clenching around her briefcase as Lisa hesitated, her hazel eyes darting between them and Maya, her stance shifting like she was caught in a tug of war. "I've got her boarding pass on file," Lisa said, her voice soft, uncertain, her fingers brushing her vest as if searching for an answer. It scanned clean, but Kyle crossed his arms, his smirk creeping back, his voice rising now, carrying through the cabin. "Check again. We've seen people sneak upgrades before," he said, his words a challenge, his gaze daring Lisa to defy him. The woman in 4C looked up from her magazine, her silk scarf slipping as she frowned, the businessman in 2A muttering something under his breath, the cabin's calm fracturing under their accusations. Maya's jaw tightened, her years in the Senate kicking in, her mind racing to stay ahead. "There's no issue with my seat," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the tension, her brown eyes locking onto Lisa's. "I paid for it. It's verified. End of story." "Couldn't they see she wasn't backing down?" Lisa nodded slowly, her face softening as she pulled out a handheld scanner, her fingers tapping the screen with a quiet efficiency. "Let me double check," she said, her tone apologetic, her eyes avoiding Kyle and Tara as she scanned Maya's pass from her records, the device beeping green with a soft chirp. "It's confirmed. 3B is hers," she said, her voice steady now, her stance firming as she faced them. "No errors here." Maya's heart lifted, a rush of triumph warming her chest as Lisa turned to Kyle and Tara, her hazel eyes narrowing slightly. "She's fine. You can take your seats," she said, her words a quiet rebuke, her hand gesturing toward the economy section. Comment number 1 if you're relieved Lisa stood up for Maya, because who doesn't love seeing a fair fight win? Out? Smash that like if you're proud of her resilience and subscribe to catch every twist as this battle heats up. Kyle's smirk faltered, his hazel eyes darting to Tara, her green gaze flashing with annoyance. But they stepped back, their shoulders slumping as they moved toward the rear of the plane, their whispers sharp and urgent. Maya let out a breath, her hands relaxing on her briefcase, her victory feeling solid this time, a shield against their relentless jabs. She'd proven her place again, hadn't she? Forced them to retreat, kept her seat, her dignity intact. The businessman in 2A gave her a quick nod, his gray suit rustling as he settled back. The woman in 4C smiling faintly over her magazine, the cabin settling into a fragile peace. But as Lisa moved off to prep the galley, Maya caught Kyle slipping. A folded note to a passenger in 5A, a burly guy with a trucker hat, his thick fingers unfolding it as he glanced at her, his brow furrowing with doubt. What was that about? Her triumph soured, a cold knot tightening in her gut as the guy whispered to his seatmate, a wiry woman with a buzzed head, her eyes flicking to Maya with a flicker of suspicion. Tara settled into a seat a few rows back, her green gaze still, burning into Maya's back, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. Had they just planted a new seed of trouble? The plane's engines roared louder, the cabin lights dimming as the flight attendants began their safety checks. But Maya's hands gripped her armrests, her brown eyes staring at the seat back ahead, her mind spinning. She'd thought she'd won, turned their ambush into a bust, but the way that note passed hands, the way Tara watched her, told her this was far from over. What kind of chaos were they stirring up now, and how would it hit her when she least expected it? The Boeing 737 hummed steadily at 30,000 feet. The cabin of Delta Flight 1423 bathed in a soft glow as the late afternoon sun filtered through the oval windows, casting golden streaks across the plush first-class seats. Maya Carter sat in 3B, her navy blazer draped over her lap, her briefcase open as she pored over her healthcare vote notes, the pages creased from her tight grip. The tension from the boarding ambush had eased, her victory over Kyle and Tara's onboard accusations still fresh. Lisa's firm, "She's fine," echoing in her mind like a lifeline. She'd proven her seat was hers, hadn't she? Forced them to slink back to economy, their smirks wiped clean, and now she could focus, get her head in the game for Washington, D.C. The businessman in 2A tapped at his laptop. The woman in 4C flipped through her magazine, the cabin settling into a quiet rhythm as the seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. Maya adjusted her glasses, her brown eyes scanning a chart on Texas hospital funding, her pen scratching quick notes in the margins, her 5'6" frame sinking into the leather as she tried to shake the unease still gnawing at her gut. But 30 minutes into the flight, a gruff voice shattered the calm, cutting through the hum of the engines like a jagged blade. "Hey you, 3B, you cut the line back there." It was the burly guy in 5A, the one with the trucker hat, his thick neck craning as he glared at her, his meaty hand clutching the note Kyle had slipped him. Maya's head snapped up, her pen freezing mid-word, her heart thudding as she met his accusing stare. His blue eyes narrowed with a mix of confusion and anger. The wiry woman beside him, her buzzed head gleaming under the lights, leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Yeah, I saw it too. You pushed right past us at the gate," she said, her words loud, carrying through the cabin, drawing the businessman's frown and the woman in 4C's startled glance. Maya's chest tightened, her anger flaring hot and fast, her mind racing back to that folded note, Kyle's sneaky handoff, Tara's knowing smile as they'd retreated. This wasn't random, was it? They'd planted this, turned passengers against her, and now it was spreading like wildfire. "I didn't cut anything," she said, her voice firm, rising over the engine's drone, her brown eyes locking onto the trucker guys. "I boarded with first class, same as everyone here." But he wasn't listening, his thick fingers jabbing the air as he stood, his bulk looming in the aisle, his trucker hat tilted as he pointed at her. "Bull, I saw you sneak up front acting like you own the place," he barked, his voice booming now, the woman in 4C clutching her magazine tighter, the businessman shutting his laptop with a soft click. Maya's hands clenched around her notes, her anger bubbling over, but she kept her tone steady, her Senate training kicking in. "Check with the crew, my pass was verified," she said, her stare unwavering, her words a shield against his rage. The wiry woman scoffed, her buzzed head shaking. "Sure, verified by who? You've got some scam going," she said, her voice dripping with doubt, her eyes flicking to the galley where Lisa stood, her short bob swaying as she turned, her hazel eyes widening at the commotion. The cabin buzzed, heads turning, whispers rippling through first class, and Maya felt the weight of their stares, a spotlight she couldn't escape, her dignity fraying under their accusations. Then the intercom crackled, the captain's voice cutting through the tension, deep and clipped. "This is Captain Daniels. We've got a report of a seating dispute in first class. Passenger in 3B, please identify yourself." Maya's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs, her eyes darting to the ceiling speaker as if it could see her. "A report? From who?" She glanced back at Kyle and Tara, barely visible in the economy rows, their heads bent close, Tara's green eyes glinting with a flicker of triumph, Kyle's smirk hidden but palpable. They'd done this, hadn't they? Turned a passenger into their weapon, escalated their game mid-flight. "I'm Maya Carter, seat 3B, she said, her voice loud, steady, her 5'6" frame rising as she stood, her navy blazer slipping to the seat, her notes clutched in one hand. "There's no dispute, I've got a valid ticket confirmed by your crew." The trucker guy snorted, his thick neck reddening. "Valid my ass, you're a liar," he said, his words a punch, the wiry woman nodding vigorously, her buzzed head bobbing like a puppet on a string. Lisa stepped forward, her navy vest crisp, her hands raised in a calming gesture. "Sir, please sit down. I'll handle this," she said, her tone firm, her hazel eyes flicking to Maya with a flicker of sympathy. But the captain's voice crackled again, insistent now. "Miss Carter, we need to verify your identity. Standard procedure," he said, His words heavy, public, stripping her bare in front of the cabin. Maya's anger surged, her hands trembling as she reached into her briefcase, pulling out her Texas driver's license, her fingers brushing the Senate ID she hadn't yet revealed, her mind racing. "Here," she said, holding it up for Lisa, her voice cutting through the murmurs, her brown eyes daring anyone to challenge her. "Scan it, check it, do what you need." Lisa took the license, her scanner beeping green with a soft chirp, her face softening as she nodded. "It's legit. Captain, she's clear," she said, her voice carrying over the intercom, her stance firm as she handed it back. The trucker guy hesitated, his thick frame sinking back into his seat, his blue eyes clouding with doubt. The wiry woman crossing her arms with a huff, her buzzed head turning away. The captain's voice returned, gruff but final. "All right, folks, let's keep it calm. We're good up here," he said. The intercom clicking off, the cabin settling into an uneasy hush. Maya sat back down, her heart pounding, her hands smoothing her notes as she forced her breathing to steady, her victory ringing in her ears. She'd shut them down again, hadn't she? Proven her place, silenced the chaos, kept her focus on the vote. The businessman in 2A gave her a quick nod, his gray suit rustling as he reopened his laptop. The woman in 4C offering a faint smile over her magazine, the tension easing like a storm passing. But as Lisa moved back to the galley, Maya caught a glimpse of Tara in the rear, her green eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping her phone with a furious rhythm. Kyle leaning over her shoulder, his buzz cut tilted as he whispered something sharp. Her triumph faltered, a cold sweat prickling her neck, her hands gripping her armrests as she stared at her notes, the words blurring. They'd lost this round, sure, but that phone, that texting, what were they cooking up now? The plane droned on, the clouds outside a endless white sea, but Maya's gut twisted, her mind spinning with the weight of their relentless hate. She'd thought she'd won, turned their conspiracy into a bust, but the way Tara's fingers flew, the way Kyle's smirk lingered in her memory, told her this was just a pause, a breath before a bigger blow. What kind of trap were they setting for her on the ground, and how would it strike when she landed? The Boeing 737 touched down at Reagan National Airport with a jolt, the wheels screeching against the tarmac as Delta Flight 1423 taxied toward the gate. The cabin of first class bathed in the dim glow of evening lights filtering through the windows. Maya Carter sat in seat 3B, her navy blazer back on, her briefcase snapped shut on her lap, her brown eyes staring out at the sprawling airfield, the Capitol's faint outline looming in the distance. The mid-flight chaos had settled. Her victory over the trucker guy's accusation still fresh, Lisa's scanner confirming her place, the captain's gruff, "We're good," silencing the cabin. She'd held her ground, hadn't she? Kept her focus on the healthcare vote despite Kyle and Tara's relentless jabs. And now she was here, in D.C., ready to fight for her constituents. The seatbelt sign blinked off, passengers stirring around. Her, the businessman in 2A grabbing his laptop bag, the woman in 4C folding her magazine with a rustle of silk. Maya unbuckled, her 5'6" frame rising as she pulled her carry-on from the overhead bin, her sneakers silent on the carpeted floor, her mind already mapping the trek to Capitol Hill. But as the jet bridge door swung open, a ripple of tension cut through the cabin, heads turning toward the exit where two uniformed police officers stood waiting, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights, their faces stern and unyielding. Maya's heart stuttered, her hands tightening around her carry-on handle, her breath catching as their eyes locked onto her, their boots thudding against the jet bridge floor as they stepped aboard. "Maya Carter!" the taller one barked, his voice sharp, his gray eyes narrowing as he scanned the cabin. His partner, a stocky woman with a buzzed head, gripping her radio like a weapon. Maya froze, her pulse hammering in her ears, her mind racing back to Tara's furious texting, Kyle's whispered plotting in the rear of the plane. This was their doing, wasn't it? "That's me," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside, her brown eyes meeting theirs, her stance firm as passengers gawked, the businessman pausing mid-step, the woman in 4C clutching her scarf. "You're coming with us," the tall officer said, his hand gesturing toward the jet bridge, his tone leaving no room for debate, his partner stepping closer, her buzzed head tilting as she sized Maya up. "What's this about?" Maya asked, her voice rising now, her anger flaring as she adjusted her glasses, her carry-on rolling to a stop beside her. The stocky officer's lips twitched, her voice flat. "Security threat, we got a tip," she said, her words a gut punch, her gray uniform rustling as she reached for Maya's arm. A tip? From who? Maya's mind screamed the answer, Kyle, and Tara's faces flashing like neon signs, their revenge hitting her like a freight train. "This is a mistake," she said, pulling her arm back, her tone cutting through the cabin's hush, her eyes darting to Lisa, who stood frozen near the galley, her hazel eyes wide with shock. But the tall officer wasn't listening, his hand clamping onto her elbow, his grip firm as he tugged her forward. "Let's go, ma'am, now," he said, his voice cold, his boots thudding as he marched her toward the exit, his partner following close, her radio crackling with static. The cabin erupted in whispers, passengers craning their necks, the businessman pulling out his phone, his fingers tapping the screen, the woman in 4C gasping as Maya stumbled slightly, her carry-on dragging behind her. They hauled her onto the jet bridge. The cool air hitting her face, the tunnel's walls closing in as travelers from economy spilled out, their eyes widening at the sight. A teenage boy in a hoodie whipping out his phone, the flash blinding her as he filmed. "Hands behind your back," the stocky officer snapped, her buzzed head gleaming as she yanked Maya's wrists together, the cold bite of handcuffs snapping shut, the metal digging into her skin. Maya's breath hitched, her anger boiling over, her voice rising as she twisted to face them. "I'm a U.S. Senator. This is outrageous," she said, her words echoing down the jet bridge, her brown eyes blazing behind her glasses, her navy blazer wrinkling under their grip. The tall officer snorted, his gray eyes flicking to his partner. "Sure you are, lady. We'll sort it out downtown," he said, his tone dripping with doubt, his hand shoving her forward as the crowd grew, a woman with a stroller staring, a man in a suit shaking his head. Maya's dignity crumbled, her sneakers scuffing the floor as they dragged her through the terminal, the glass walls reflecting her cuffed hands, the passengers' gasps and murmurs, a deafening roar in her ears. They pushed her past the gate, her carry-on left behind, Lisa's stunned face fading into the distance, and out into the main concourse, where a swarm of travelers parted like a sea, their phones flashing, their voices buzzing with shock. "Security threat, my ass," Maya muttered, her anger a white-hot flame, her mind racing to piece it together. Tara's texting, Kyle's note, this was their trap, sprung with brutal precision. They shoved her into a holding room, a stark box, of concrete and steel, the door slamming shut with a clang. The tall officer uncuffing her with a grunt, his partner standing guard by the exit, her radio spitting updates. "Sit," he barked, pointing to a metal chair, his gray eyes cold as he loomed over her, his badge catching the harsh light. Maya sat, her hands rubbing her wrists, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Check my ID. It's in my briefcase. I'm Senator Maya Carter from Texas," she said, her brown eyes locking onto his, her 5'6" frame unyielding even in defeat. The stocky officer smirked, her buzzed head tilting. "We'll see about that. Got a tip you're a fraud," she said, her words a knife, her hand resting on her belt as if daring Maya to move. An hour crawled by, the clock on the wall ticking like a bomb, Maya's anger simmering as she sat there, her mind spinning with the vote she was missing, the lives hanging in the balance, the humiliation seeping into her bones. Then the door creaked open, a supervisor in a crisp suit stepping in, his face pale, his voice tight. "Release her now. No evidence. Tip was bogus," he said, his eyes flicking to Maya with a flicker of shame, the officers exchanging a glance, their confidence cracking. The tall officer uncuffed her, his grunt reluctant, the stocky one stepping back, her buzzed head dipping as she muttered something under her breath. Maya stood, her wrists red, her voice cutting through the room. "Who tipped you off?" she asked, her stare pinning the supervisor, her anger a live wire. He hesitated, his suit rustling as he shifted. "Anonymous came from the flight," he said, his words vague, his eyes avoiding hers. Kyle and Tara, it had to be, their revenge hitting her where it hurt most. Her freedom, her reputation, her work. She grabbed her briefcase, handed back by a sheepish gate agent, her hands trembling as she checked her phone, the screen lighting up with alerts. A video of her arrest already viral, the headline screaming, "Senator or suspect," across social media. Her breath caught, her victory from the flight shattered, her name dragged through the mud, the businessman's footage spreading like wildfire. She stepped out into the terminal, the crowd thinning now. But the stares lingered. The whispers, a knife in her back, her carry-on rolling behind her as she headed for the exit, her mind racing. She'd escaped their trap, hadn't she? Proven it was a lie, walked free. But the damage was done, her Senate duties delayed, her face plastered, online, her fight for Texas teetering on the edge. What would this cost her now? And how much worse could their next strike be? Maya Carter stormed out of the holding room at Reagan National Airport, her sneakers thudding against the polished floor, her navy blazer wrinkled from the handcuffs that had bitten into her wrists just moments ago, her carry-on rolling behind her with a faint squeak. The terminal stretched out before her, a maze of glass and steel, the evening crowd thinning as travelers hurried toward exits, their whispers fading into the hum of overhead announcements. She'd just walked free. The police supervisors, pale face and stammered no evidence, still fresh in her mind. Her release a hard-won escape from Kyle and Tara's vicious trap. Her brown eyes blazed behind her glasses, her 5'6" frame radiating fury as she headed for the Delta customer service desk, her briefcase clutched tight, her phone buzzing with alerts about the viral video of her arrest. She'd been humiliated, dragged off the plane like a criminal, but she wasn't done, was she? She had power they couldn't touch, a Senate ID they hadn't seen, and now it was time to strike back. She reached the desk, a sleek counter manned by a Delta manager named Greg, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his navy suit crisp as he typed at a terminal, his eyes flicking up to meet hers with a flicker of recognition. "Senator Maya Carter," she said, her voice cutting through the terminal's noise, her hand slamming her Senate ID onto the counter, the gold seal glinting under the lights, her stare pinning him like a hawk on prey. "I was just falsely detained because of your staff, Kyle and Tara, from Dallas-Fort Worth. They've harassed me since check-in, and this ends now." Greg's jaw dropped, his fingers freezing mid-keystroke, his hazel eyes widening as he took in the ID. Then her face, then the ID again, his suit rustling as he leaned forward. "Senator, I had no idea," he stammered, his voice tight, his hands scrambling for a notepad. "What happened?" Comment number 1 below. If you think it's about time Maya flipped the script on these clowns, because who's ready to see justice hit hard? Smash that like button if you're cheering for her to take them down, and subscribe to catch every second of this payback. Maya recounted it all, her voice steady but edged with steel, her words painting the picture. Check-in mockery, security sabotage, gate delays, onboard lies, and now this, a fake tip that got her cuffed in front of a plane full of passengers. "They called me a security threat, Greg, and your airline let it happen," she said, her brown eyes boring into his, her 5'6" frame unyielding as she tapped the ID, her anger a live wire sparking with every syllable. Greg's face paled, his pen scratching furiously, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is unacceptable, Senator. I'm suspending them immediately, pending a full investigation," he said, his hazel eyes darting to his screen as he typed, his fingers trembling slightly. "We'll comp your flight, offer a formal apology, anything you need." Maya nodded, her jaw tight, her hands clenching her briefcase. "Suspension's a start, but I want accountability, not handouts," she said, her tone final, her mind already shifting to the next move, a press briefing to reclaim her name, to turn this nightmare into a weapon for her constituents. She stepped away, her sneakers silent on the tile, her carry-on rolling as she pulled out her phone, texting her aide, "Set up a presser now, outside the terminal." She'd won, hadn't she? Turned their trap into her triumph, exposed their hate, and now she could fight back loud and public, her Senate power flexing like a muscle she'd honed for years. The terminal's glass doors loomed ahead, the DC night cool against her skin as she stepped outside, the Capitol's glow a beacon in the distance, her briefing notes buzzing in her mind, the vote still within reach. She spotted her aide, Jamal, waving from a black SUV, his lanky frame jogging toward her with a tablet in hand, his voice urgent. "Senator, "Media's on it. CNN's already asking questions," he said, his dark eyes flicking to her wrists, the faint red mark still visible, his brow furrowing with concern. "Good," Maya said, her voice firm, her brown eyes glinting with resolve as she slid into the SUV, her carry-on stowed beside her, her hands smoothing her blazer. "Let's tell the world what Delta let happen." Jamal nodded, his tablet glowing as he typed, the SUV pulling away from the curb, the city lights streaking past as Maya prepped her statement, her words sharp, her anger channeled into purpose. She'd turned the tables, hadn't she? Taken their hit and thrown it back, her Senate ID a trump card they couldn't counter. But as the SUV rolled through DC's streets, a roar erupted ahead, a crowd spilling onto the pavement, their voices a chaotic swell, their signs flashing in the headlights. "Fraud, Senator," and "Resign now." Maya's breath caught, her hands gripping her briefcase, her eyes widening as she saw the mob, dozens strong, their faces twisted with rage, their phones filming as they surged toward the SUV. "What was this?" Jamal slammed on the brakes, his voice tight. "Senator, it's a protest. They're saying you scammed your way into office," he said, his dark eyes darting to the rearview mirror, his hands white-knuckling the wheel. Maya's mind raced, her victory unraveling, her phone buzzing with a new alert, a tabloid headline screaming, "Senator or scammer, airline staff expose fraud." Kyle's leak, Tara's revenge. They'd hit the internet, twisted her arrest into a lie that ignited this fire. Comment number 1 if you're stunned they turned her win into this nightmare, because who else feels the gut punch of this betrayal? Hit that like if you're raging for Maya to fight through, and subscribe to see how she battles this mob. The crowd pressed closer, their fists pounding the SUV's windows, glass shuddering under the blows, their chants a deafening roar. "Liar! Liar!" Maya's heart pounded, her anger flaring hot and wild, her brown eyes scanning the chaos. As Jamal inched the vehicle forward, horns blaring around them. "Get us out," she said, her voice low, steady, her 5'6" frame tensing as a rock cracked the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass, the mob's fury a tidal wave she couldn't stop. They escaped, tires screeching as Jamal floored it, the crowd fading into the night, but Maya's hands trembled, her victory hollowed out, her Senate ID useless against this storm. She'd thought she'd won, suspended them, taken control, but they'd struck back, harder, uglier, their lies turning strangers into enemies, her press briefing now a war zone. The SUV sped toward a hotel, her mind spinning, her anger a coiled, spring ready to snap. She'd reclaim her name, wouldn't she? But as police sirens wailed in the distance, her phone lit up with another alert. Protesters vowed to follow Senator Carter. And she knew this was just the beginning. What kind of hell would break loose when that mob caught up with her again? The black SUV screeched through the darkening streets of Washington, D.C., its tires gripping the asphalt as Jamal floored the gas, weaving past honking cars, the shattered windshield spiderwebbing Maya Carter's view of the chaos they'd just escaped. Her navy blazer clung to her sweat-dampened skin, her brown eyes wide behind her glasses, her 5'6" frame pressed against the leather seat as the echoes of the mob's chants, "Liar! Liar!" rang in her ears. The protesters' fists had pounded the windows, their signs flashing "Fraud, Senator" in the headlights, their rage fueled by Kyle and Tara's viral lies, a tabloid hit that turned her arrest into a conspiracy. She'd thought she'd won at the airport, suspending them with her Senate ID, but this was their counterstrike, a brutal wave crashing over her triumph. Her hands gripped her briefcase, her phone buzzing with alerts, the healthcare vote slipping, further away as Jamal's dark eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his voice tight. "They're still behind us, Senator. A few cars back," he said, his lanky frame hunched over the wheel, his tablet sliding across the dash with every sharp turn. Maya twisted in her seat, her heart slamming against her ribs, her gaze catching, the glint of headlights tailing them, the mob's fury unrelenting, their phones filming through the night. "Keep going," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, her mind racing to salvage this, to get to a hotel, to regroup. The SUV swerved onto a side street, the city lights blurring past, the Capitol's dome a distant silhouette. But the roar grew louder, the mob spilling around a corner, their numbers swelling. Dozens now, maybe 50. Their voices a tidal wave of hate. "Stop her! Fraud!" they screamed, their signs waving like battle flags, their faces twisted with a rage she couldn't comprehend. How had it come to this? Jamal slammed the brakes as the crowd surged ahead, cutting them off, their bodies a wall of flesh and fury, their fists smashing the SUV's hood, the metal denting with a sickening crunch. Maya's breath caught, her anger flaring hot and wild, her brown eyes scanning the chaos as a brick sailed through the air, shattering the driver's side window, glass raining onto Jamal's lap, his yelp sharp as he ducked. "Senator, we're trapped," he said, his voice cracking, his hands shielding his face, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. Maya's pulse roared, her hands fumbling for her phone, her fingers dialing 911 as the mob pressed closer, there, fists hammering the doors, their slurs cutting through the night. "Thief, resign!" The line clicked, a dispatcher's voice calm but distant. "Emergency services, what's your location?" she said, her words a lifeline as Maya shouted, over the din, "Constitution Avenue near 3rd, we're under attack, send help now." The mob rocked the SUV, its frame groaning, a woman with wild hair clawing at the cracked windshield, her nails scraping glass, a man in a leather jacket smashing the passenger window with a bat, shards exploding inward, slicing Maya's arm, her navy blazer staining red. She winced, her voice rising. "Hurry, they're breaking in!" The dispatcher's reply was lost in the roar, the mob's fury a living thing, their phones flashing as they filmed, their lies turning her into a villain, her Senate work drowning in their hate. Sirens wailed in the distance, a faint hope cutting through the chaos, and Maya's hands clenched her briefcase, her brown eyes blazing as she faced them, her 5'6" frame unyielding even as the SUV rocked harder, its tires lifting off the ground. "Back off!" she yelled, her voice a thunderclap, her anger a shield. But they didn't hear, didn't care, their slurs a chorus of venom. "You don't belong here!" Police lights flashed, red and blue slicing through the night, officers spilling from cruisers, their shouts sharp as they pushed into the crowd, batons swinging, voices barking. "Disperse now!" The mob faltered, some scattering, others shoving back, their signs dropping to the asphalt as the cops closed in, their radios crackling with orders. An officer yanked open Maya's door, his broad face slick with sweat, his voice urgent. "Senator Carter, come with me," he said, his hand pulling her out, her sneakers crunching glass as she stumbled onto the street, her carry-on tumbling. After her, Jamal staggering out behind, his cheek bloody, his eyes wide with shock. The police formed a wedge, shoving the mob back, their sirens blaring as Maya and Jamal were hustled to a cruiser, its doors slamming shut with a thud, the chaos muffled, but still alive outside. "You're safe now," the officer said, his voice gruff, his dark eyes flicking to her arm, the blood seeping through her blazer. "We'll get you to a hotel. Medics are on the way." Maya nodded, her breath ragged, her hands trembling as she pressed a tissue to her cut, her mind spinning with the vote she'd missed, the lives hanging in the balance, the humiliation now a physical wound. She'd survived, hadn't she? Escaped, their fury, her body intact but her spirit battered, her Senate duties delayed by this nightmare Kyle and Tara had unleashed. The cruiser rolled forward, the mob's chants fading, their figures shrinking in the rearview mirror. But her phone buzzed again, a new alert lighting up the screen. Senator Carter's office vandalized in Texas, a photo showing smashed windows, spray-painted slurs, fraud in red across her Houston headquarters. Her heart sank, her victory from the airport a distant memory, her hands gripping her briefcase as the cruiser sped toward a hotel, its lights a blur in the night. "They hit my office," she said, her voice low, her brown eyes staring at the image, her anger coiling tighter, her resolve hardening like steel. Jamal turned, his bloody cheeks stark under the dome light, his voice shaky. "Kyle and Tara, they're behind this too?" Maya nodded, her jaw tight, her mind racing to fight back, to turn this chaos into a weapon, to reclaim her name. "They won't stop," she said, her words a vow, her 5'6" frame tensing as the hotel loomed ahead, its glass facade a fragile shield against the storm. She'd escaped the mob, yes, But this was their next blow. A remote strike that hit her. Where it hurt most, her work, her home, her people. The cruiser pulled into the parking lot, officers flanking her as she stepped out, her sneakers crunching gravel, her carry-on rolling beside her, her arm throbbing as medics rushed over, their kits clanking with supplies. She'd survived their fury, physically safe now. Her wounds minor but emotionally shattered. Her Senate vote lost to this madness. Her office a ruin. Her fight for Texas teetering on the edge. She'd regroup, wouldn't she? Plan a counterattack, use her power to strike back. But as the medics bandaged her arm, her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. This is just the start. Her breath hitched, her brown eyes narrowing, her anger a live wire sparking with every beat of her heart. What else could they throw at her now, and how much more could she take before she broke? The hotel room door clicked shut behind Maya Carter, the faint hum of the air conditioner cutting through the silence of the 10th floor suite at the Marriott near Reagan National Airport, its beige walls and stiff carpet a stark contrast to the chaos she'd just fled. Her navy blazer hung loose over her bandaged arm, the medic's white gauze stark against her skin, her brown eyes hollow behind her glasses as she dropped her carry-on by the bed, its wheels crunching glass shards from the mob's attack. The DC night pressed against the window, the Capitol's glow a distant taunt. Her healthcare vote lost to the madness Kyle and Tara had unleashed. Her Houston office now a vandalized ruin. The image of fraud in red paint seared into her mind. She'd escaped the mob, hadn't she? Found safety here, her body intact, but her spirit was a frayed wire, her resolve tested by every blow. Her aide Jamal slumped into a chair, his lanky frame sagging, his bloody cheek cleaned but raw, his dark eyes flicking to her with a mix of exhaustion and guilt. "Senator, I can't believe they hit your office," he said, his voice low, his tablet glowing as he scrolled through alerts, his fingers trembling slightly. Maya nodded, her 5'6" frame sinking onto the bed, her briefcase open beside her, her hands rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had bit. "It's them, Jamal, Kyle, and Tara. They're not stopping," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel, her mind racing to fight back, to use her Senate power to crush this nightmare. She pulled out her phone, her screen lighting up. With the anonymous text, "This is just the start," her brown eyes narrowing as she showed it to Jamal, his brow furrowing with a flicker of dread. "We need a federal probe into Delta now," she said, her tone commanding, her anger coiling tighter, her resolve hardening like granite. "They've gone too far." Jamal nodded, his tablet tapping as he drafted a request, his voice firming. "I'll call Senator Hayes. He owes you a favor. We'll get the FBI on this," he said, his dark eyes meeting hers, his loyalty a lifeline in this storm. She'd turn this around, wouldn't she? Use her clout to strike back, to expose their hate, to reclaim her name. But as Jamal stepped into the hall to make the call, her phone buzzed again. A flood of alerts spilling across the screen, reporters swarming the hotel, their headlines screaming, "Senator Carter's secret flights exposed, and itinerary leaked, fraudulent travel." Maya's breath caught, her hands trembling as she opened the first story, her flight details from the past month laid bare. Dates, times, destinations, every trip twisted into a lie. Taxpayer-funded luxury for a fake senator. Her heart sank, her mind racing back to her office, her files, her aide. Who had access to this? She stood, her sneakers pacing the carpet, her brown eyes darting to the door as Jamal returned, his face pale, his tablet clutched tight. "Senator, press is downstairs. They've got everything. Your schedule, your meetings," he said, his voice cracking, his dark eyes avoiding hers, his hands fidgeting with the device. Maya's stomach twisted, her anger flaring hot and wild, her voice rising. "How'd they get it, Jamal? That's locked in my office. You're the only one with the key." His lanky frame stiffened, his cheek twitching, his eyes dropping to the floor, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. I don't know," he stammered, his voice weak, his fingers brushing his bloody cheek like a nervous tick. Maya's mind screamed, her years in the Senate sharpening her instincts, her brown eyes boring into him, her 5'6" frame towering with suspicion. "You don't know?" she said, her tone cutting through the room, her hands clenching her phone, the leaked itinerary glowing like a betrayal. Jamal shifted, his tablet slipping to the chair, his voice barely a whisper. "Tara called me, Senator, last week. She had photos. Said she'd ruin my sister if I didn't help," he said, his dark eyes glistening, his guilt spilling out like oil, his lanky frame shrinking under her stare. Maya's breath hitched, her anger a white-hot flame, her voice booming now. "You sold me out? To them?" Jamal flinched, his hands rising in a feeble defense, his voice cracking. "I didn't want to. They threatened her. I just gave them your flights. I didn't think." His words trailed off, his eyes pleading. But Maya's fury drowned him out, her brown eyes blazing, her 5'6" frame trembling with rage. "You didn't think they'd turn it into this? My office trashed, a mob after me, my vote gone," she shouted, her phone slamming onto the bed, her hands shaking as she paced, her sneakers scuffing the carpet. She'd trusted him, hadn't she? Built her team on loyalty, and now this, a knife in her back from the inside. Kyle and Tara's reach deeper than she'd imagined. Jamal sank to his knees, his voice a sob. "I'm sorry, Senator, I'll fix it," he said, his dark eyes wet, his bloody cheeks stark under the light. But Maya turned away, her anger a wall, her mind racing to salvage this. "Get out," she said, her voice cold, her brown eyes staring at the window, the city lights a blur beyond the glass. He stumbled up, his lanky frame dragging to the door, his tablet forgotten, his exit a quiet thud as the lock clicked shut. Alone, Maya grabbed her phone, dialing Senator Hayes herself, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Mike, it's Maya. I need a federal probe into Delta now they've got my aid. My life's a target," she said, her words sharp, her anger channeled into power, her 5'6" frame standing tall as Hayes promised action, his gruff FBI's on it, a lifeline she clung to. The call ended, her hands trembling as she sank back onto the bed, her brown eyes staring at the ceiling, her victory bitter, the probe a seeming triumph, her Senate clout flexing to fight back. She'd turned their betrayal into a weapon, hadn't she? Forced the feds to move, to dig into Delta, to stop this madness. But as she reached for her briefcase, her phone buzzed again, a new alert lighting up the screen. Warrant issued. Senator Carter accused of fraud. A fake document claiming she'd bribed her way into office, her signature forged, her name smeared beyond repair. Her heart stopped, her hands freezing on the phone, her brown eyes widening as she read, the probe's promise crumbling under this new blow, Tara's fingerprints all over it, her revenge a masterstroke. The hotel walls closed in, reporters pounding the lobby doors below, their shouts faint but relentless, her allies turning as the lie spread, her phone buzzing with panicked calls from staff, her fight for Texas teetering on the edge. She'd thought she'd won, launched a counterattack, but this was their next hit, a legal noose tightening around her neck, her betrayal from within a wound that wouldn't heal. What could she do now, with the world turning against her? The Marriott hotel room felt like a cage to Maya Carter, its beige walls pressing in as she stood by the window, her navy blazer crumpled on the bed, her brown eyes staring out at the DC night, the Capitol's glow mocking her from afar. Her phone lay on the mattress, its screen dark now, but the fake warrant's words burned in her mind. Senator Carter accused of fraud, a forged document claiming she'd bribed her way into office. Tara's revenge twisting her life into a lie. Her 5'6" frame trembled, her bandaged arm throbbing under the gauze, her glasses fogging slightly as she fought back tears, her Senate power slipping through her fingers like sand. Jamal's betrayal still stung, his leaked itinerary, fueling the mob, the trashed Houston office, and now this. A legal noose tightening around her neck, her healthcare vote lost, her constituents abandoned to this chaos. She'd launched a federal probe, hadn't she? Turned his treachery into a weapon, but it wasn't enough, not against this storm. A sharp knock rattled the door, her heart jolting as she turned, her sneakers scuffing the carpet, her voice hoarse. "Who is it?" she called, her brown eyes narrowing, her hands clenching into fists. "DC police, ma'am, open up," a gruff voice replied, the words a hammer blow, her breath catching as she crossed the room, her fingers fumbling with the lock. The door swinging open to reveal two officers, their badges glinting, their faces grim. The taller one, A wiry man with a shaved head stepped forward, his voice flat. "Maya Carter, you're under arrest for fraud and bribery," he said, his gray eyes cold, his hand pulling cuffs from his belt, the metal clinking like chains. Maya's stomach dropped, her anger flaring hot and wild, her voice rising. "This is a setup. Check my Senate ID. I'm a U.S. Senator," she said, her brown eyes blazing, her 5'6" frame planting itself firm as she grabbed the ID from her briefcase, thrusting it at him. The shorter officer, a stocky woman with a tight bun, snatched it, her hazel eyes squinting as she turned it over, her lips curling into a smirk. "Looks fake to me," she said, her words a gut punch, her hand tossing it onto the bed like trash, the gold seal glinting uselessly under the lamp. Maya's breath hitched, her mind racing. Tara's forgery a masterstroke, her identity stripped in a heartbeat. "It's real. Verify it," she shouted, her voice booming, her hands trembling as the tall officer grabbed her wrists, the cuffs snapping shut, the cold steel biting deeper than before, her bandaged arm screaming in protest. They hauled her out, her sneakers dragging on, the carpet, the hallway, a blur of beige and brass. Hotel guests peeking from doors, their gasps a chorus of shock as she stumbled, her brown eyes darting for an escape that wasn't there. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open to a lobby, swarming with reporters, their cameras flashing, their shouts a deafening roar. "Senator Carter, did you bribe your way in? Why the fake ID?" Maya's dignity shattered, her head high but her heart breaking, her voice lost in the chaos as the officers pushed her through, her cuffed hands a public spectacle, her navy blazer sleeve stained with blood and shame. They shoved her into a cruiser, the door slamming shut, the city lights streaking past as they sped toward the station, her mind spinning, her anger a coiled spring ready to snap. She'd faced worse, hadn't she? Senate hearings, racist slurs, but this was a breaking point, her life a lie in their eyes, her fight for Texas a fading dream. The station loomed, a gray fortress of concrete and steel, the officers dragging. Her inside, their boots echoing on the tile, her wrists aching as they booked her, their fingers smudging ink across her prints. Her mugshot a stark flash of light, her brown eyes hollow, her glasses slipping down her nose. They tossed her into a holding cell, the bars clanging shut, the tall officer's voice sharp. "Court's tomorrow, sit tight," he said, his gray eyes flicking to her with a flicker of doubt, his partner smirking as they walked off, their radios crackling with static. Maya sank onto the bench, her 5'6" frame curling in, her hands rubbing her wrists, her anger simmering beneath a tide of despair, her mind racing to fight back, to find a way out. Hours ticked by, the cell's cold seeping into her bones, her thoughts a whirlwind of Kyle and Tara's hate, Jamal's betrayal, the mob's fury. And now this, a kangaroo court waiting to bury her. Then a guard approached, his heavy steps echoing, his voice gruff. "Carter, you've got a visitor," he said, unlocking the bars, his beefy hand gesturing toward a room down the hall. Maya stood, her sneakers scuffing the floor, her brown eyes narrowing as she followed, her heart pounding with a flicker of hope, her mind grasping for an ally in this storm. The door creaked open, revealing Kyle, his buzz cut glinting under the lights, his hazel eyes smug as he leaned against the table, his Delta tee swapped for a cheap suit, his smirk a knife in her gut. "You?" she said, her voice a hiss, her anger exploding, her 5'6" frame lunging forward, the guard grabbing her arm, his grip iron as she strained against him. "Told you it wasn't over," Kyle said, his voice low, cruel, his hands clasping behind his back, his smirk widening as he nodded to a folder on the table. "Testimony. Senator Carter threatened me." Maya's breath stopped, her brown eyes widening, her mind reeling as he leaned closer, his words a venomous whisper. "Court's gonna love this. You're done," he said, his hazel eyes glinting with triumph, his suit rustling as he stepped back, the guard pulling her away, her voice rising. "It's a lie, you set me up," she shouted, her anger a wildfire, her hands straining against the cuffs, her 5'6" frame shaking with rage. Kyle walked out, his smirk lingering, the door slamming shut, the guard shoving her back to the cell, her mind spinning with his words, her Senate ID dismissed, her fight teetering on the edge. She sank onto the bench again, her breath ragged, her brown eyes staring at the bars, her anger a live wire sparking with every beat of her heart, her breaking point cracking her open, but not breaking her yet. She'd find a way, wouldn't she? Then her mind clicked. Tara's texting, the digital trail, a thread she could pull. She stood, her sneakers pacing the cell, her hands digging into her pockets, finding her phone's memory card, her fingers brushing the tiny chip she'd swapped out before the arrest, her brown eyes glinting with a flicker of hope. She banged. On the bars, her voice sharp. "Guard, I need my lawyer now," she said, her tone commanding, her mind racing as he nodded, her 5'6" frame tensing with purpose. The lawyer arrived, a wiry man with a gray suit, his voice calm as she handed him the chip, her words fast. "Tara's texts, trace them. They're behind this," she said, her brown eyes locking onto his, her anger channeled into strategy. He nodded, rushing off, and hours later, court convened, a judge's gavel banging, Kyle on the stand, his lies spilling out. But the lawyer stood, his voice booming. "Digital evidence, Your Honor. Tara's trail proves forgery." The courtroom, hushed, the judge's eyes narrowing, Maya's cuffs removed as the truth hit, her name cleared, her brown eyes blazing with triumph, her 5'6" frame standing tall. She'd won, hadn't she? Exposed them, turned their lie into her victory. But as she walked free, her phone buzzed. A new alert. Bomb threat at Senator Carter's home. Her heart sinking, Kyle's final blow landing hard. What would she face next, with her world still burning? Maya Carter stepped out of the D.C. courthouse into the crisp morning air, her navy blazer hanging loose over her bandaged arm, her brown eyes squinting against the sun as it glinted off the marble steps, the Capitol looming in the distance like a promise reborn. Her sneakers crunched gravel as she moved, her 5'6" frame standing tall, her glasses catching the light after a night in a cell, a fake warrant, and Kyle's lies undone by her lawyer's digital evidence, Tara's texting trail proving the forgery that had nearly buried her. The judge's gavel still echoed in her ears. Case dismissed, her name cleared, her Senate ID validated, her victory a hard-won fire burning in her chest. She'd beaten them, hadn't she? Turned their hate into a weapon, exposed their network, and walked free, her carry-on rolling beside her, her mind already racing to Capitol Hill. The healthcare vote delayed, but not lost. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, their voices, a chaotic swell. "Senator Carter, how do you feel? What's next?" She paused, her breath steady, her brown eyes meeting theirs with a steely resolve, her voice rising over the din. "I'm heading to the Senate to fight for my people, but this isn't over. Delta's systemic bias in these attacks, I'm taking it national," she said, her words sharp, her anger channeled into purpose, her 5'6" frame a beacon of defiance. She'd reclaimed her name, yes, but the bomb threat at her Houston home, Kyle's final jab, gnawed at her gut, her phone buzzing with alerts as police scrambled to investigate, her constituents' safety now her burden. She slid into a waiting car, her aide replaced by a new face, a sharp woman named Lena, her dark hair pulled back, her green eyes flicking to Maya with a nod. "FBI's on the probe, Senator. Kyle and Tara are in custody," she said, her voice crisp, her tablet glowing. With updates, the car pulling away from the curb, the city waking around them. Maya nodded, her hands smoothing her blazer, her brown eyes staring out at the streets. The mob's fury, Jamal's betrayal, the trashed office fading into a rearview mirror of pain. Her victory bittersweet, but real. She'd expose it all, wouldn't she? Turn this nightmare into a crusade, a national reckoning for racial injustice, her Senate power a megaphone for the voiceless. The car rolled toward the Capitol, its dome gleaming against a cloudless sky, the Senate chamber waiting, her colleagues buzzing with the news, her speech already forming. A fiery call to action against bias, backed by the hacked evidence of Kyle and Tara's racist network, texts and emails her lawyer had pried open, a web of hate stretching beyond Delta into dark corners of power. She stepped out, her sneakers hitting the pavement, her carry-on rolling as Lena flanked her, the boss, Capitol steps rising before her, her 5'6" frame climbing with purpose, her brown eyes blazing with a fire that hadn't dimmed. The chamber hushed as she entered, her colleagues turning, some with nods, others with wary glances, her voice booming as she took the floor. Today, I stand not just as a senator, but as a survivor of systemic hate. From an airline counter to this very city, we must act. I'm leading a task force to root this out nationwide. Her words a thunderclap, her anger a torch, her evidence projected on screens, Tara's messages. She doesn't belong. Kyle's plans. Take her down! The chamber erupting in gasps, her brown eyes sweeping the room, her victory a rallying cry. Then the twist hit, her voice faltering for a split second, her hands gripping the podium. But I'm stepping down from this seat, not out of defeat, but to lead this fight full-time. The anti-racism task force starts today, with me at the helm. Her words a shockwave, senators murmuring, her 5'6" frame stepping back, her Senate ID no longer a shield but a stepping stone, her sacrifice a gambit for a bigger war. She'd won the battle, yes, but chose a new front, her brown eyes glinting with resolve, her voice steady as she concluded, "This is bigger than me. It's for every person targeted, mocked, dismissed. We rise together." Her speech ending, to stunned applause, her carry-on waiting as she walked out, her sneakers silent on the marble, her navy blazer a symbol of a fight reborn. Lena followed, her green eyes wide, her voice low. "Feds just confirmed. Kyle and Tara indicted. Bomb threat traced to him. They're done," she said, her tablet buzzing with the news, the car waiting to take Maya to a press conference. Her new mission already trending. Carter resigns for justice. She'd turned their hate into her fuel, hadn't she? Sacrificed her seat for a crusade, her victory a launch pad. But as she settled into the car, her phone buzzed one last time. A letter from Tara, mailed from jail, its words scrawled in black ink. "You think you've won? I've got friends. We'll find you." Her threat a chilling echo, her green eyes haunting Maya's mind, her brown eyes narrowing as she crumpled it, her hands steady but her heart racing, her triumph bittersweet, a new battle looming. The car sped off, the Capitol fading behind her, the city alive with her story, her 5'6" frame unbowed, her anger a quiet flame, her resolve a steel core, her fight for Texas, for justice, for every soul like her, just beginning. The bomb threat a shadow she'd face, Tara's words a promise she'd crush, her legacy rewritten not in a Senate chair, but in the streets, the courts, the nation she'd awaken. What would come next, with her world still at war? Maya Carter's journey in this story is a raw, unflinching look at the pervasive nature of racial injustice and the resilience it demands. The first lesson is the power of systemic bias, how a simple airline check-in spiraled into a nightmare of mockery, false arrests, and mob violence, all because two staffers judged her by her skin. It shows that prejudice isn't just personal, it's embedded in institutions, ready to strike when least expected. Second, Maya's story teaches us the strength of standing firm. Her refusal to crumble under humiliation, betrayal, and physical danger, a testament to inner grit. She turned every blow into a weapon, using her Senate ID not as a crutch, but as a tool to expose the truth. Third, the betrayal from within, Jamal's leak under Tara's blackmail, reveals how fear can fracture even the closest bonds, a reminder to guard trust fiercely. Finally, her shocking resignation to lead an anti-racism task force underscores sacrifice, trading power for purpose, proving that real change often requires bold, unexpected moves. This isn't just a tale of survival, it's a call to recognize and resist the everyday racism that festers unchecked, from counters to courtrooms. Maya's fight wasn't for herself alone, but for every soul dismissed or degraded, a beacon for collective action. So what's the takeaway? We must confront bias head-on, with courage, cunning, and a willingness to upend the status quo, because silence lets the Kyles and Taras win. Now, it's your turn. How have you faced prejudice in your life? Drop a comment below with number 1 if you've ever fought back like Maya. Hit like if her story fires you up, subscribe for more tales of defiance, and share to spread this wake-up call. Thanks for joining this journey. Here's to building a world where justice soars higher than hate.